Hi, I'm Liz McGill. I want to officially welcome you to Stanford Law School. For those of you who are not members of the community, we're delighted to have lots of members of the community and lots of visitors here today. I've spent the year at Stanford learning about the amazing things that Stanford Law School faculty and students and staff and alums have been doing. And I can tell you there are dozens and dozens of things that I am incredibly proud of and everyone in this institution is incredibly proud of. And there is nothing we are more proud of than what this institution and David and our students and our faculty did in relation to Prop 36 in representing the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. What the group of students and David and Mike Romano did on behalf of those clients is do what lawyers have done in wonderful ways over time, which is they saw something that was unjust and they worked to do something about it. And the best part of the story is they succeeded. Which those of you who are students of history know does not always happen. So, and no one was more at the center of it, at the helm, as a visionary, as a supporter, as a cheerleader, as a tactician, than David Mills, who you're going to hear from today. The faculty had the opportunity to hear David talk about this effort a couple months ago, and I think there was not a dry eye in the room, and not no one left that room feeling more excited about the possibilities of what lawyers can do and what law students can do, and just a wonderful, wonderful story. So I'm excited that David's going to get to share it with you today. Stanford Law School has been lucky to be part of this because of David and the work that Mike Romano and David Mills have done in this on behalf of so many people in the state. So I'm really happy you're going to get to hear this story today. I think you're going to leave inspired and excited about what the possibilities are for achieving justice. And so thank you for coming. I want to turn it over now to Mike Romano. I'm sorry, Larry Marshall is telling me that I should gratefully recognize that this lecture is part of a series supported by the Brudico family. So we have them to thank for the support of this lecture, and you to thank for being here and listening to what David has to say. But I'm going to turn it over to Mike Romano, who I know many of you, if not all of you in this room, know has done incredible work on the project as well with David, and he's going to be the next person. Thanks for coming.
Oh, no. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Romano, and I run the Three Strikes Project, and I don't want to take too much time here, but I do need to acknowledge both David, who we'll hear from, and Larry Marshall, who have really been my mentors and inspiration through working on all of this
I'm not responsible for you.
For all of our work on Three Strikes before Proposition 36, through the campaign of Proposition 36, and now that we're in the stage of implementing it, it has really been the chance of a lifetime and really inspirational. The reason why we do it really is to help folks that we think have been unjustly imprisoned and swept up into a political storm that they really had nothing to do with. I think that they'll be the first to acknowledge that they aren't blameless. This isn't the Innocence Project. I like to joke that we're the Guilty Project, just unfairly imprisoned. And I would like to quickly just introduce you all to a few former Three Strikers who are here in the front row, who get to meet a little bit more after David speaks. It's in alphabetical order, really quick. Is Carl Gray? Carl, can you raise your hand? So I'm going to ask you to save your applause to the end, just to for time management. But just a little bit of perspective on the Three Strikes law in general and who the Three Strikes Project represents. Carl's third strike was for stealing a box of beer steins from a storage locker. He did 13 years of a life sentence for that. We represented him in habeas corpus proceedings before Proposition 36. He's been out for 3 years. He went to a drug rehab program in Los Angeles at Salvation Army for the first 6 months that he was out. As soon as he finished that, he moved up to Seattle, where he got a job at Hertz Rent-A-Car and quickly became the employee of the month there. He now has his own business, refurbishing homes. And for, Carl's story to me speaks to, for the folks who believe that these guys are hopeless recidivists and can't do anything but commit more crimes, Carl, I'm really inspired by your story. Thank you for being here. Next is Alton McSween. Alton, will you raise your hand? Alton's third strike was for petty theft. He served 12 years in prison. Prior to getting in trouble with the law and addiction, Alton was a professional football player. He played in the Super Bowl against Roger Staubach. So he's had quite a life. He's actually been out underneath Proposition 36 for 6 weeks. You've been doing extraordinarily well. It's not the first time he's been here at Stanford, so thank you, Alton, for being here. Next is Shane Taylor. This is Shane Taylor. Shane is literally the poster child for Proposition 36. There's a poster on my office wall of Shane. When I said literally. His third strike was for simple possession of a fraction of a gram of methamphetamine. We got involved in Shane's case because the judge who sentenced him to life back in 1998 called me up on the phone, actually called Linda originally on the phone and said, Linda Johnson, who was our longtime legal assistant, and said, I've made a horrible mistake. I sentenced Shane to prison for life for simple drug possession. Now I'm retired, and I think about the guy every day, and can you please help? It was a pretty extraordinary phone call. I still remember, Linda, when you called me, and I was at a cafe and patched him through. We ended up also getting the prosecutor in Shane's case to also agree that Shane had been sentenced too long for simple drug possession. He never committed a violence. These guys, none of them, they all have long records. They've all committed prior felonies, but none of them have hurt anybody or committed any acts of violence. Anyway, despite the fact that the judge and the prosecutor who prosecuted Shane were now on our side and trying to get Shane out, we appealed his case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, who said it doesn't matter. Regrets are not a legally cognizable remedy under the law. And it wasn't until Proposition 36 was passed, and then we litigated his case again underneath Proposition 36, that Shane was released 19 days ago. And his family is also here. His wife and daughter are also here. So that's Shane Taylor. And last but not least is Norman Williams, who goes by Will. Will's third strike was for petty theft of a floor jack from the back of an open pickup truck in 1996 in Los Angeles. Will was our very first client of the Three Strikes Project. He served 13 years for petty theft, and when he got out of prison, I still remember going to pick you up with Kathleen Fox, one of our students up at Folsom State Prison. And by the way, our students, we get a lot of recognition for this. Me, Larry, David, Susan and Emily, who are our staff attorneys. But really, it's the students of the Three Strikes Project who do all the legwork, all the briefings, stand up for our clients in court. And Kathleen Fox stood up for Will in Los Angeles Superior Court. We went and picked him up from Folsom State Prison. He had nowhere to go. And that was the easy part, getting him out of prison. Will went from homeless shelter to homeless shelter in downtown Palo Alto and has worked his way up from picking garbage off of the soccer fields at 6 o'clock in the morning on weekends in Palo Alto. Now he's a manager of janitors in San Jose. He works harder than I do, I like to say. He's come here many times to speak to my students. Thank you for being here. And this is the Three Strikers who were all here, so please welcome them. All right. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor to have you guys here. I'd like to now introduce Barbara Freed, who we all know and love, to introduce David. So thank you all for coming, and come ask me if you have any questions about the Three Strikes Project later. Here's Barbara.
Larry Marshall, there you are, Larry. Larry asked me if I would introduce David, and I said it would be an honor. But I realized afterward that it probably was also shrewd because David absolutely hates this sort of event in praise of him. And I'm a good enough friend that Larry probably figured he would forgive me. So I hope he will. Years ago, I encountered a Chinese proverb, which translated to, if you see a flower, water it. If you see a weed, pull it up. The moment I saw that, I knew that those were words to live by. They were hard words to live by, but they were all you needed. In the 15 plus years I've known David, he has tried and succeeded at that enterprise more than I think anybody I know. And that's the highest compliment I can give anyone. I want to just quickly mention a few things that are, I think, really notable about what David did. The first is that his efforts on 3 strikes, like his efforts in a number of other areas, pushing for political and social change, are directed at forgotten populations, at people nobody cares about, nobody knows about, no one wants to hear about. They don't have a seat at the political table. They have no influence of any sort. And it is a rare person who, from a position of relative privilege, would see that and would want to dedicate his energies to watering flowers and pulling up weeds in that particular plot of land, as it were. The second thing I think that I take away from knowing David and watching him on this project and other things is it's a kind of admonition against fatalism. Political change and social change always seems impossible until it doesn't. And David, in this project and in many others, has been able to see the possibility of change before it materialized, to imagine the cracks that, with the right pressure, could be opened up. The third thing is David made it happen with lots and lots of help from Mike, the students, many other people. In the years I've known David, I have come to realize he is a very impatient man. You don't want to be standing between David and daylight. Fortunately for all of us, he's got his eye on the real daylight here, and we are all the better for it. Let me just end with a personal note, which is that our students, a group of our students, teach a wonderful course at San Quentin Prison, and I see a number of them here now. And I participated in a couple of sessions this spring. I was at the first session and sat next to a man named JW, and we chatted during break a lot. And I said, how do you like these classes? He said, they're fantastic, but I'm hoping not to be here for the end. And I said, how come? And he said, because I'm a third striker and I'm covered by Prop 36. Well, I returned toward the end of the semester to teach a class, and JW was out, and another student in that class was out. And it's moments like that that make you realize what change means in this world and the people it affects. So, David, thank you.
No, stop. If I'm so popular, how come Weisberg won the teaching award? What would have happened if we had lost? I don't know how many people would be here. You know, most of you know me, but not all of you. But kind of reminds me of a story. I was privileged a number of years back to spend an hour alone with Nelson Mandela. And you know who he is, right? You're Stanford students. And we were talking, and he told me a story, and the story goes something like this. He said right after he got out of prison, after 26 years in rather harsh conditions, he was invited to London, and he got to go to Buckingham Palace. And he gets to meet the Queen, and he goes in, and she comes up to him, and she says, Mr. Mandela, I recognize you from the T-shirts. And he looks at her, and he says, Elizabeth, I recognize you from the stamps. It's one of my favorite stories, so you all can recognize me from the posters that are up and the Rolling Stone picture. It's kind of weird, right? Anyway, to more serious stuff. But before I start, I really do want to make it very clear this is not about me. It's about the students who fought the three strikes cases. It's about the Three Strikes Project, about Stanford Law School's extraordinary commitment to social change and to the support I got during this entire process. It really is a dedication to a group of extraordinary people, and to my partner Ann, who was a remarkable help during this entire process and who was really the genius behind a lot of what happened. It's also, and I want to acknowledge up front, two people who are here, Ace and Dan. Ace is the most remarkable political operative in the state, maybe the country, and we'll talk about what Ace did. Dan is his PR guy. Dan was terrific and is terrific. They're both continuing to work with us. And Ace really did design many of the strategies to which the successful result can be attributed. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start with Gary Ewing. Those of you who heard me at the faculty, a lot of this is going to sound familiar, so forgive me. I don't have a lot to say generally. Gary Ewing, not a good guy. Liked to steal things, liked to use drugs, started committing crimes when he was in his late teens, continued to commit crimes into his 20s. And Gary ends up doing a robbery, which he uses a knife, threatens with the knife, nobody gets hurt, gets sentenced to 10 years in prison. It was his 98th strike. And but it was technically, I guess, his second strike. And he gets sentenced to 10 years. He gets out, I think it's 1998, I don't quite remember. And 10 months after he gets out, Gary is a African-American guy from Watts, walks into a golf shop. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination why that makes any sense, and decides to steal 3 golf clubs. Now, Gary must not be too smart, because he puts the 3 golf clubs in his leg, in his pant leg, and starts to walk out, not realizing that somebody may recognize that he didn't walk in with a limp. And poor Gary gets busted for this, and 10 months after he's arrested, after he's released from his 10-year prison sentence, he's sentenced under California's 3-strike law. And he's sentenced to a term of 25 years to life for stealing 3 golf clubs. Of course, he had a record that justified, in the minds of the judge and the prosecutor, the imposition of a 3-strike sentence. Gary is one of a number of people for whom the 3 strikes law ultimately was applied in California, 7,000. And Gary, unfortunately, though, had full-blown AIDS. And when he's sentenced, he said, "Give me a chance. I'm going to die. Give me a chance." Judge says, "No, you're going to jail for the rest of your life." Now, all of this is a very familiar story, and Gary Ewing isn't the most attractive of our 3-strike cases. In fact, he wasn't one of our 3-strike clients. He's important because, of course, his case goes to the Supreme Court of the United States on the claim that the sentence against him was disproportionate, violated the cruel and unusual punishment clause of the 8th Amendment, and that it was inappropriate and disproportionate to sentence him to jail for the rest of his life. The Supreme Court ultimately upholds the conviction, the sentence against Gary, in a remarkable series of opinions in which there's not really a majority for any one theory, but there are sufficient justices to hold him in prison for the rest of his life, leaving just a little bit of room for a cruel and unusual claim, but not much. Last year, on May 24th, Gary died. He died in prison. He died in prison blind. He died in prison with advanced effects of HIV, AIDS, full-blown AIDS, and he had cancer as well. He sought to get his release. Not only couldn't he get his release, but Gary was, at that time, subjected to the harsh realities of the California prison system, and he asked for a lower bunk because he couldn't climb down, being, at this time, totally or nearly totally blind, he couldn't climb down from an upper bunk. And he fell off the upper bunk, ends up in the prison hospital, and dies in the prison hospital. At no point did someone think it was appropriate that this fellow who couldn't see, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything for himself should be released. That it was better to keep him in prison because we're all safer because of that, I suppose. I'm not bitter. So how did this happen? Well, 3 strikes, you all know what it is. You commit 3 felonies in the state of California, and if the prosecutor decides to charge it as a third strike, you go to jail for 25 years to life, unless the judge decides in his discretion to strike one of the strikes, which virtually never happened. 3 strikes began in 2000, Mike? What? 1994. In 1990, I always need Romano for facts. He doesn't get them right, but we can always rely on him to tell us what it is. In 1994, it was the second state to adopt 3 strikes. Washington was the first. But California's 3-strike law was really, really different than any other 3 strikes law in the United States. California's version of 3 strikes had 2 or 3 provisions that were quite remarkable. Almost every other state required that the strikes be violent. At least 1, if not 2 of them, be serious and violent offenses. California's provisions required only that it be a felony, a serious felony. And therefore, residential burglary, where no one was home, where no weapon was used, is a strike. There are a whole raft of crimes by which you can be convicted for a third strike, which we wouldn't consider to be super serious. The other provision in California's law that's really unusual was the provision, and I emphasize was, that Prop 36 eliminated, which was that the third strike could be trivial. Didn't even have to be serious. It just had to be a felony, and it didn't really have to be a felony. It could be a misdemeanor that could be charged as a felony. Therefore, stealing a pair of socks, stealing pizza, stealing, what did you take? Beer steins. That should be a strike. All could be charged as a felony, and therefore a third strike. That was really unusual. There was no time limit. Didn't matter when you committed the offense. It could be a strike. And it was subject to prosecutorial discretion, meaning prosecutors would decide which crime, whether to charge a crime as a strike, and particularly as a third strike. So you had vastly different interpretations of 3 strikes law. You had Los Angeles under Gil Garcetti, who decided that everything that could be a third strike would be charged as a third strike, and therefore 1,000 of our Prop 36 potential releasees are in Los Angeles County, or from Los Angeles County. Or you could be in San Francisco, where we have a somewhat different view of the world, and there is now, I think, only 1 person in San Francisco who could get the benefit, maybe 2, of the 3 strikes law change. It started, of course, because Mike Reynolds' daughter was horribly killed in a robbery. The perpetrator of the murder was killed in a police shootout, but his co-felon, if you will, who, although could not be convicted of the crime of killing Mike's daughter, but was there at the crime, was convicted of a third strike. And at that time, there was no 3 strikes law, and this third guy was sentenced to only 9 years in jail. Remember, the guy who pulled the trigger was killed in a shootout. But this guy was only sentenced to 9 years in jail, and Reynolds had the brilliant marketing ploy of saying that he'll get out before I finish paying for my daughter's funeral. A great line. And I'm sympathetic with Mike Reynolds. It was a horrible crime. But 9 and 10 years in prison isn't the easiest thing in the world. But he decided he was going to start to try and get California to adopt a 3 strikes law. And he wasn't going anywhere until the horrible murder of poor Polly Klaas. Then in 1994, 94, 93, I can't remember. Polly Klaas was kidnapped and murdered in Petaluma County. And as a result, there began to become an upswell of support that we needed to have determinate sentences. That the idea that folks could get released based upon the discretion of the judge was just not acceptable. That we wanted everybody who had committed a series of felonies to go to jail for the rest of their lives. And we wanted it to be the most draconian of possible versions of three strikes. And that's how three strikes got started. As a result, thousands and thousands of folks get sentenced to under the three strikes law, a law that I find and continue to find personally abhorrent. And we started to send them to jail without regard to whether it made sense. And of the 7,000 three-strikers, 4,000 of them have committed trivial third offenses. And of the 4,000, 3,000 have never committed a very serious offense. Never committed anything like a robbery, many of them committed robbery, murder, rape, and other similar kinds of very serious offenses. Even more startling was the fact that 71% of three strikers are African American or Hispanics. And of that 71%, which kind of reflects the prison population, and that's a conversation for another day, 45 of the 71 are African Americans. 26 are Hispanic. That's peculiar because in the overall prison population, only 28 of the prison population is African American, but 45 of three strikers. Even more remarkable is that 39% of them are folks who have either serious developmental issues or other mental illness problems. So 39% of our three strikers have been designated as having mental issues requiring treatment, serious treatment. Almost all of them have committed drug offenses, etc. So years ago, Mike began the three strikes, which started as a clinic, is now a project. And Mike, he and I debate which one of us had the idea first, but it was me. Mike began the three strikes clinic and started to look for the possibility of releasing folks who have been subject to the three strikes penalty and who shouldn't have been. Now, what does it mean not should have been? What are the kinds of arguments you make? You can make arguments that it's cruel and unusual punishment, but of course in Ewing, Justice Scalia made it clear what he thinks is cruel and unusual punishment, which is that proportionality doesn't account for the Eighth Amendment. Incapacitation can satisfy the cruel and unusual punishment argument, and therefore you have no proportionality. Get your mind around that. Of course, I always try to get my mind around something Scalia says. And not. And you could argue there was improper representation of counsel. You could argue there was some problem in the record. But imagine what it's like. There's 7,000 three strikers, 3,000 of which have never committed a serious offense, case by case by case. And we had great cooperation at the time from Steve Cooley, who agreed to consider some of our cases and was willing to jointly petition with us. Other cases we litigated more seriously. And we began to get some folks out, in total 30, 25. And it occurred to us that this was never going to be a meaningful social change. It's a great teaching technique, a great teaching opportunity, a great opportunity for students to see that you can make a difference. But it wasn't going to make a difference overall in this crazy law. So we decided that maybe we ought to take a shot at changing this law. Maybe we could do it. But of course, a few years earlier, the state of California had voted in Prop 66 that to change the third strike to require a serious offense should be rejected, 52 to 48 or something like that. And it had lost in the result of a barrage of incredibly negative advertising in the last minute. It had been winning, and then a guy named Henry Nicholas, who was the billionaire founder of Broadcom, who later became quite famous for a sex dungeon in Los Angeles. I'm not kidding, Vanity Fair article. I believe everything in Vanity Fair when it comes to Henry Nicholas. He financed an anti-Prop 66 campaign, which ran Willie Horton ads. And you had these horrible pictures of potential releasees under this proposed change. They got these really courageous folks like Jerry Brown and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Pete Wilson to say they shouldn't pass this law. And in the last minute, despite the polling, it lost. So we were faced with that reality, and we thought, well, what could we do to make it different? And so what we decided was that we would exclude from the proposed change to the law and I'm getting to the process by which that occurred, that we would exclude any person who had committed what we called a super strike, a murder, a rape, etc. So that they couldn't post pictures in the television of folks who had previously committed horrific crimes. Bless you. So, in any event, so we decided we were going to try and make a change with this difference in place. So the first thing we thought about was, how do we do this? And one of the things that was not acceptable to me was the notion of losing again. One, I hate to lose. Who doesn't? But more significantly, I believe criminal justice in the United States is requiring of a massive overhaul. And the only way that massive overhaul is going to happen is not through the guts of our politicians, because they don't have any guts. It's only going to happen if they begin to think that the population will believe and support change. If politicians believe that change can be made, they'll get behind it. But so we couldn't lose, because if we lost, they would think law and order still prevails. So we commissioned the polling, and the polling was really remarkable. What it showed was that the people of California really did support changing 3 strikes, so long as it was a change that they thought was consistent with the original intent of 3 strikes, to put away serious violent felons. They didn't think it was fair. It wasn't the money. They didn't think it was fair to keep these folks in prison. So it was extraordinary. Fairness seemed to sell to the electorate. So with that in mind, because I had started out, frankly, with wanting to completely repeal 3 strikes. My desire was to pass a referendum to reverse the decision of the electorate in 1994. And I was faced with the reality that 3 strikes as a brand wasn't going to lose. It has 75% support in the state. There was no chance. At that point, I really had a crisis of conscience, because I didn't really feel that a small change justified the energy and the effort, and I was afraid that it would just make the law better, more sane. And a saner law doesn't necessarily mean a future law will result in it being repealed. Larry Marshall and Ann actually counseled me to keep going. And despite the crisis of conscience, I agreed, and we set out to make this change. So the next thing we did was we needed to figure out who could we hire to give us advice. And we found Ace, who I introduced to you earlier, who became our real political partner in this, who helped design the campaign. The next thing we had to do was to write the law. Now, we recognized that we needed the support of the district attorney, or as many district attorneys as we could get, and particularly Steve Cooley from Los Angeles. So, I skipped a step. In addition to all this, being here at Stanford, we needed a client. So, I'm not bashful. I went to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I asked them if they would be our client. And I agreed, because I'm the chairman. So it was a long conversation. It was a difficult conversation. It took a lot of persuasion, but they agreed. So now I have two hats on, right? Like I said, I'm not bashful. And so we went forward with our client and decided we had to draft the statute, and we needed Cooley's support. John Payton, who at that time was the president and director general of the LDF, joined us. And with his help, unfortunately, just as an aside, John, who was a dear friend and a great person, one of the greatest civil rights attorneys of his generation, died in the middle of this campaign at a very young age, completely unexpectedly. But his number two, Jeff Robinson, with valiant effort, stepped in. In any event, John went with Mike to meet with Cooley, and they negotiated the three strikes provision. It's odd. It includes one provision that was very troubling to me, which was residential burglary was going to continue to be considered a serious offense. Residential burglary without regard to whether any weapons or any harm or any injury was done, or was used, or any injury was done. Nevertheless, our polling showed that folks really did hate residential burglary, and that we might lose if we put it in. I'm not so sure. But in any event, we excluded it. And with that in mind, and with some other weird provisions that Steve Cooley wanted, a lot of those having to do with sex crimes, we drafted legislation. So now we needed to get title and summary. Now, this is a critical part. After you get a ballot initiative written, you have to go to the Attorney General's office, and they provide you with a title and summary. And it's supposed to be completely without interference, but, you know, stuff goes on. This is politics. And we got a really good title and summary, a really helpful title and summary, helpful enough that if you didn't read it carefully enough, you might have thought you were voting to make three strikes harsher. Blame Ace. And with that in hand, and we then began the tedious process of signature gathering. Now, in order to get something put on the ballot, you can go to the legislature, or you have to get a certain number of signatures, about 600,000. To get 600,000, you need about 800,000 signatures, 850,000 signatures, and so you hire a signature gathering firm. It is the dumbest thing in the planet. You pay $2 a signature. It costs you $1.5 million to $2 million. It cost us close to $2 million to gather the signatures. It's really silly. I remember sitting with Gavin Newsom, not to drop a name, he does have nice hair, and sitting with Gavin Newsom and saying to him, I'd rather write a check to the state of California for $2 million than to have to pay the stupid signature gatherers $2 million. He agreed with me, but didn't do me much good. In any event, frankly, Ann and I put up the $2 million for the signature gathering, and we got started. And we went around, we got the signatures. If you pay the $2 million, you're on the ballot. It's as simple as that. Nobody fails. Nobody fails who pays the signature gathering firm. It's a nutty, nutty country. You think three strikes is bad. And so we got the ballot signatures. We then began, with ACE's tutelage, the campaign. And I'll get to it in a minute. And ACE designed the campaign to be return three strikes to its original intent. Return three strikes to its original intent. And that's resonated with the folks. And then I had to go around trying to raise some money. And one of the most startling and saddest things about this whole process was the realization that it doesn't matter what part of the political spectrum you're on, you don't care about poor people of color in prison. You just don't. Liberals were useless, gave us nothing, save for one fellow whose name is George Soros, who did put up a significant amount of money. All of the money for this campaign came from, or 95% of it came from two sources, George and me. That's the only time you ever hear me and Soros in the same sentence. And it's not the only time. But it was impossible. I remember sitting with folks who you would ordinarily think would care, the normal liberal community, and talking to them about you can't allow this to continue. We can't have these poor people of color sitting in prison. 71% of our three-strikers are black or Hispanic. We can't allow this to continue. And they didn't care. I don't want these criminals in my neighborhood. They would boldly say that. I don't care about these people, was the message, although they wouldn't say it. My plate was full. One person, very famous person, who raises money for democratic causes and has Bill Clinton at her house all the time, said, I'm too busy with the America's Cup. That was my favorite. Et cetera, et cetera. So the reality is, the money that we raised came from either George Soros, from us, or from friends of ours who agreed because we were involved to put the money in. And it's a sad commentary because it really tells you what the state of why we are in this position in this country in terms of criminal justice. It isn't the right. It isn't the left. It is the liberals don't care. They just don't. 10 minutes. I'm almost done anyway. So, despite that, we continued along with our message, and in great fear that Henry Nicholas would come back, and that he would begin a new campaign to contest what we were doing. But fortunately, he got hit with a tax bill of $100 and some million right at the end of the campaign, and so he disappeared. And we never did get meaningful opposition. One of the things that we were able to do was in the last campaign under Prop 66, the Prison Guard Union was one of the clear, meaningful supporters against Prop 66, and they agreed to stay neutral. That was a great victory for us, although they're probably not nearly as powerful as they once were. And so we continued during this campaign, and then we had to build up a coalition. It couldn't be from the right, it couldn't be from the left, it had to be across a broad spectrum. The first thing we needed was we needed to make sure that we had district attorneys. Now, most of the district attorneys in the state opposed us. But we got 3 courageous district attorneys. Steve Cooley, of course, Jeff Rosen from San Mateo County. What? Santa Clara County, they're all the same. Santa Clara County, and George Gascon from San Francisco. We got all the big city mayors to support us. Then we got, miraculously, Grover Norquist. Now, Grover Norquist isn't somebody I ordinarily associate with, but he was terrific, a great supporter. We got Cory Booker, a good friend of ours. We got Jeff Canada from the Harlem Children's Zone. We got Brian Stevenson. We got folks from all over the political spectrum to support us. Bill Bradley. And then we got George Shultz. Tried to get Condi Rice, but she was too busy trying to be vice president. But we had a huge number of supporters. And it made a big difference because we built this coalition. The coalition was bipartisan. And that was, to our mind, critical, keeping in mind that our message continued to be fairness, because fairness sold. Economic costs also helped, but fairness was what was selling. And as the election got closer and closer, and the polling kept showing that we were winning by huge amounts, I was never believing this, and Ace was telling me I should believe it. Election finally happens, and miraculously and fortunately, otherwise none of you would be here today, listen to why I lost, 69% of the folks voted our way. We won every county. It was a miracle. At the end, I started to get greedy. I wanted to get as many votes to change the law as they had gotten the first time to get the vote through. We didn't quite make it, but we came pretty close. but it was an overwhelming victory. Staggeringly, after the victory, the district attorneys resisted. Because one of the provisions that was critical to us was a provision in the three strikes, Prop 36, that it was retroactive, that these folks here could get out. And the way we wrote it was that you could be released upon petition by you to the sentencing judge, or sentencing court rather, and as long as the state could not demonstrate that you represented a clear danger to society, they had to release you. The burden was on the state to prove that you continued to be a danger. So the good-minded district attorneys read that and decided to try and find folks who could be released. But there are district attorneys in this state, many, who resisted, who continued to resist, and said, no, these folks shouldn't be released because they represented a danger. That's why we charged them as three strikers, and they can't be released now. So what happened was we began to have to fight and continue today to have to continue to fight to allow for the 3,000 eligible three strikers to be released. So far, we have about 500 released. Most of them are represented by the DAs, by the public defenders, but many of them have no counsel. And our Three Strikes project with Mike and Emily and Susan, can't find Susan, continue to work to represent those folks who otherwise do not have representation, or to find them representation, as well as to work on certain impact litigation associated with this. And it's remarkable work. We continue to work hard to get them released, but of course getting three strikers released isn't good enough. Because what are we going to do? Here's what happens. You get released from prison. You've been in prison 17 years, 13 years, 14 years, 15 years for stealing a loaf of bread. Well, whatever kind of person you are when you went in, you're worse now. Hope you guys will forgive me. And because whatever you learned in prison, I don't suspect it was very good. So many of these folks need rehabilitation. Many of these folks need reentry services. They've been in jail for 15 years. And what happens when you're released? When you're released in the state, if you're lucky, they give you the $200 you're owed. Because of realignment, many of those folks are released from jails, and they don't have the $200 to give them. If you're lucky, you get some clothes. Most of them get paper suits. Worse, they'll release you in the middle of the night. They don't tell us when they're going to release them. We ask, tell us when this guy's going to get released. In LA, the jails are open 24 hours a day. Release them at 2 in the morning. So where are they going to go? They hitchhike. We find them sleeping in front of reentry services. We find them sleeping on the streets. So we continue to work hard to figure out reentry services because we need to provide guidance, help, and support. We've put together a list of very helpful reentry programs. Delancey Street is one that Ann and I have been working with quite closely. All of them are in need of coordination, but they can only do some of these people. The state should be paying for this, but of course it won't. And so we're faced with these people who, to me, it's critical that as few as possible don't recommit a crime. Not only because of the work we did. I'm not stupid. I know that these folks, some of them are going to commit a crime. But because a horrible crime would undermine the desire for continuing change. We need to change the criminal laws in the United States. We can do it. You, the person next to you, your friends, we can make these changes. The country is ready for changing thinking in criminal law, in criminal justice enforcement. Liberals don't seem to be, but the rest of us are. I used to be a liberal. Now I'm a full-blown communist. We really can make change. But in order to do so, we have to build a groundswell of public support for it. And we've been doing that. We did it with this Prop 36, and that's why we don't want recidivism. We don't want recidivism because it'll hurt the future change. I want to really say something that's really meaningful to me. It's not about me. I really appreciate all you folks being here, listening to me. Some of you have been my students. You never listen this rapturously. I really, really want to say this. It's not about me. It was never about me. It was never about one person. It's about a group of people, you, the students, who worked so hard on this three-strike project. It's about you. It's about Mike. It's about Larry. It's about all of us. It's about making it's possible to make a change, but it's hard. It's costly, but more significantly, we can do it. If we work together, I sound like a preacher. We can do it. The law can be changed so long as we build up support for these changes in the law. So I'm willing to answer any questions as long as they're easy. Thank you. Thank you.
Before we get to questions, there are some individuals here who wanted to sign and present you with. Let's go to the vote.
A baseball bat?
Yeah.
This is something I wanted to do. This is something I want.
Roger Staubach. I'm doing whatever he tells me to do.
This is something I wanted to do for a long time. A lot of when you're, I did 12 years on a 25 to life sentence, and when you're doing a life sentence, as these guys will attest to, you don't have hope a lot of times. Hope is taken away from you the way the prison environment is. I was really blessed. I was at a place like San Quentin, if that's easy to say, because there's more programs at San Quentin than anywhere else, and you take advantage of them. But what this man did was give you something that's not tangible, and that's hope. You hope when you're in prison, when you're doing a life sentence, you hope you don't die while you're incarcerated. You see other people die. Like Prop 66, that was just like getting kicked in the stomach years ago, and that didn't pass. But David here just gave us hope. That was that carrot in front of you to keep going, to keep working and keep pushing. Because, you know, we had that hope one day we're going to be out here in society and be able to do good things. And more important than that, we want to be out here in society and make his work worthwhile. I know a lot of the stuff that I do, I want to honor him. You know, I'm a few hours short of being a substance abuse counselor, a few hours short of being a domestic violence counselor out of the county Marin. And it's this man that gave me the impetus to do all that stuff. And I know I speak for all the three strikers in the state of California. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Oh boy, here we go. Wow, I just want to say thank you for all the future lawyers that you guys, all the work you're going to do for the people that are incarcerated, and for whoever. You guys are a great group of people. Susan got my life back for me 3 years ago. The whole Stanford organization is fantastic, and I won't let you down.
Well, I wasn't thinking about speaking, but, you know,
Now you have no choice.
What the guy said is true. Since I've been out, I've been able to do a few things, and it's because of this guy here, and I'd like to thank you very much.
Well, I'm not the best speaker either, but I want to thank David Mills and Stanford Law Clinic for getting me out and giving me my family back. Thank you.
Larry asked me to let you know that this is a token of affection from everyone, well, not everyone, but many, many of the people who joined you in this endeavor. Kamala Harris, some of the district attorneys who supported you, Ace, Dan, me, Mike, Susan, Larry. You'll notice many friends and loved ones have signed onto this bat. So we
all know the
thank
Kamala Harris story here. So when I spoke last time, I introduced Kamala. I introduced Sherilyn, who introduced Kamala, and it's the only time I've ever worn a jacket in about 5 years. And I said I was reluctant, but I said I would wear a jacket because she was here. And then she got up and she said, "Well, I want to tell you, David, you really look good in a jacket, but it helps that you're smart." I thought it was really cool. Well, anybody have any questions? Jeez Louise. Sir.
Here, speak loudly.
I had some questions, but I'd like to know how I could maybe volunteer to help in the future. And also, this is not a promotion or anything, but I'm expanding a business with a friend with a $12.8 billion company, and we don't care what they did. We don't even ask,
That's great. So I'll give you my card.
Come on, some of you must have some questions. I could have kept talking.
Over here, David.
I called on him.
Oh, sorry.
The recent issue of it's a great question. The recent issue of The Economist had a sentence that kind of surprised me. It talks about the over-incarceration in California and says they recently passed Prop 36, which made a change to the three strikes law, and recent polling shows that it could have been more broadly written. I have no idea what they're talking about since I haven't done any polling. Ace, do you have any idea? And so do I think there's a hope to repeal three strikes? Yeah, I do. But I think it only will happen if after this experience, and we wait a year and we don't see much recidivism, that folks will begin to think that there's a possibility that we can, in fact, release these people from prison without the whole world coming to an end and our safety being challenged. So I think we have a chance to go back to a time of sane sentencing. And the next couple of years, if we are successful in our reentry efforts, I look forward to working with whoever is willing to do it to take another step. And I think the voters are ready.
I'm wondering, there are people who say that this is a California moment and this experiment has implications nationally, and I'm wondering what on-the-ground efforts or things going on in other states or at the national level this has implications for.
I can talk a little about other states. I know Washington State, in light of Prop 36, is thinking of reducing the severity of its three strikes law. I think Colorado? I thought I read Colorado as well. I think on a national level, it's tough. I have toyed with the idea of working with Congress to try and consider revamping the laws in terms of sentencing, but it's more than I think we have the ability to really think about or do. So I don't know. It's a great question. I think it's more for somebody a lot younger than me. Sir? Yeah. What we've done is contacted and begun the integration of released three-strikers into reentry programs. Reentry programs work. They really do work. They are, because of privatization, not coordinated. And you have a whole bunch of individual little fiefdoms, which represent the reentry programs, because they're all funded by private funds as opposed to public funds. But they really do work. The few that I know about, Homeboy in Los Angeles, Delancey Street, which exists in San Francisco and Los Angeles. I just learned about another one in Los Angeles. They do seem to work. And what we're doing is we're trying to, with the clients that we represent, trying to make certain that they not only get released, but they have a reentry program in place, that we have services for them, potential jobs for them, psychological counseling, etc. So that's what we're doing, and we've made a deal with Delancey Street to take hundreds of our Los Angeles released three-strikers. We took some negotiations, but we got them to agree to do that. They have a big place in Los Angeles, and there's 1,000 three-strikers who are subject to Prop 36 from Los Angeles. So that's what we're doing. John. It's not being, for sure, it's not being implemented in the way it was historically, although there were, until Prop 36, continuing stories. We had a guy just before the adoption of Prop 36 who was sentenced to life for stealing a pair of gloves in Northern California. So as opposed to thousands, I think it's hundreds, but I still think individual prosecutors are pursuing three strikes, and they obviously can't pursue it with a trivial third offense now, but they are pursuing three strikes. Now, the problem is that, and this was always a difficult issue, was we don't really know what would have happened or what these defendants would have been charged with if Prop 36 had passed. All right? It's a really complicated question because prosecutors might have made a deal to allow them to plead to a petty theft with the theory they were going to jail for life, whereas they might have had some other serious offense that they could have charged them with. We just don't know. So it's really hard to know how much of a change in the law, as opposed to the 3,000 that are getting released, or 2,500, how much of a difference this really makes.
David, before we part, there's been so many words of thanks, but I just want to say one thing. When we talk about these kinds of efforts, a lot of people say, well, why in a law school? Aren't we here to teach students the law? And we can answer, of course, by the way in which these cases have created a skill set, have engaged students in lawyering, writing briefs, memos, investigating, interviewing, thinking about larger change, all of that on a skill set. But I want to submit to you, David, that what you've done for the law school and what this is really about is inspiring each of us about the capacity for change and about the cost of apathy, about the cost of pessimism, that the greatest obstacle to progress is a sense of impotence. And no one in this room can ever feel that way about some injustice they see. No one in this law school who's watched this for the past 5, 6, 7 years can ever say something's too big for us to tackle. That's a blessing for all of us, and that's the highest order of teaching people what the law is.